Recent reports by Baku on alleged shelling from Armenia's Sunnik region, the very area where Baku demands an extraterritorial corridor, may suggest the threat of a military offensive. Baku is possibly creating a background to slice away a corridor from Armenia to be supervised by Russian border service. The corridor has been the red line for the Armenian government after the defeat in war amid what is criticized by domestic opposition as excessive concessions. Yerevan has come up with the plan of multiple roads, infrastructure instead. According to expert evaluations, the only mediator who can tip the scale in favor of peace is the new US administration. Will they intervene, or will they allow the reopening of a bloody wound in South Caucasus? We are headed for Washington for answers.
Behind me is the Capitol, the seat of the United States Congress, the legislative body of federal government. Decisions made here affect the rest of the world, shaping and reshaping politics. We are here to find out the fate of the strategic partnership between Armenia and the United States, as well as the possibility of peace in South Caucasus. Mr. Senator, as you know, Biden administration signed a strategic partnership with Armenia, which would be an important preventive measure for escalation in South Caucasus. Do you believe that Trump administration will move ahead with it?
I hope so. I mean, I certainly think that it's important to be able to have that vision forward in terms of how things can try to resolve. So that's certainly something that I'll continue to push on. I've had a lot of disagreements with the Trump administration on other areas, but so far, I haven't heard anything that leads me to believe that on this front that they'll change.
Last week, something that seemed like a breakthrough in Armenian-Azerbaijan peace talks was done with basically because Baku stepped back again, set up more preconditions. Do you support peace in South Caucasus?
Well, I certainly support peace, and I hope that that's something that can come about. I used to work as a diplomat, working United States diplomat at the State Department, so want to make sure that those talks and that process is moving forward in that way. So I'm continuing to hope that that happens.
What's your message to Baku in relation to the prisoners of war that are in Baku prisons, Armenian hostages?
Well, look, I hope that this can be resolved, and I hope that we're able to move forward. And I think, here standing here today as we're commemorating the 110th anniversary of the genocide, everybody here wants to be able to have that sense of peace, to be able to have that sense of freedom, and that's something we'll keep pushing for.
How far is the U.S. administration willing to go to have peace in place?
Well, you'll have to ask the administration about that. That is something that they should answer for, and I hope that they do, because I do think that they need to be on the record in terms of what it is they're trying to achieve.
We stand by Armenia, and they have a very difficult situation in their neighborhood with Azerbaijan and with Turkey, countries that are hostile around them. This is a perfect example of when the United States should stand with a democracy that has had dealt, almost 100 years ago with genocide, and even to this day has to deal with incursions on their independence. I hope the Trump administration will stand behind these arrangements and make them real.
Do you believe that having peace in place in South Caucasus is a priority for Mr. Trump and his administration that came to power promising peace?
Well, I think the peace is an essential element of what happens. The peace, though, has to be a peace that is fair to all sides. It can't be a peace that's capitulation. And so I would hope that there are no special additional things that are required for Armenia to sacrifice in order to have peace. They deserve to be able to live in their land and to be able to make plans for the future as one of the many democratic nations in the world. I hope the United States will be supportive of that. No, I don't believe concessions are the way. I think we have to stand strong with Armenia, and as I said a second ago, to make sure that the peace is a peace from strength and from honesty and not merely capitulation. The Armenian people have suffered over an extended period of time from having that hostility around them. We don't need to add to it now. We need to stand by a peace that's respectful of both sides and can be established over a long period of time.
There are Armenian prisoners of war in Baku cells right now. How does this align with American value system. What are the steps that the U.S. administration could take to bring them back home?
Well, we have talked about the situation of hostages in Israel being held in Gaza and how important it is for a release of those hostages in order to have peace. I think the same principle applies here. I think those individuals who are hostages, they're called by some prisoners of war, but I think they should be released as part of this. That would be a sign of sincerity on the part of all players that we can move forward with peace.
Mr. Congressman,
yes.
Recently, what seemed like a breakthrough between Armenia and Azerbaijan was stopped. Baku set up even more preconditions for the peace agreement, and then false accusations of ceasefire violations. What is the role of the U.S. administration in ensuring and securing peace in South Caucasus?
We need to make sure that Azerbaijan keeps its word. And to the extent that they're not, we need to expose them. We also need to be a force for human rights, demanding that prisoners that under Azerbaijan control are released. And we need to make it clear that we are an ally and we are a friend of Armenia, and that we will be wind at the backs of those people in Armenia, so many who have relatives here in the United States. I'm from Worcester, Massachusetts, the oldest Armenian community in the United States, the first Armenian church. When I first got elected, when we commemorated the genocide, the first few pews of the church would be filled with survivors. Now they're all gone. We can't forget about them, and we need to be a strong force on behalf of Armenia.
The U.S. administration and Armenia signed a strategic partnership document recently. Is this being implemented? Is the process underway?
Well, I mean, the job of those of us in Congress is to make sure it is implemented and to make sure that we are doing our part in keeping our word. And that's one of the messages that members of Congress have been saying over and over and over. When we say that we're an ally, we say that we're a friend, we need to mean it.
What's your message to Baku that still holds Armenian hostages in Baku?
Release them. Release them. That's my message. Release them. And we're going to continue to be vocal about those hostages until they're all released.
Thank you.
Thank you.
U.S. and Armenia signed a strategic partnership recently, and many experts believe that its implementation will be very helpful to prevent escalation in South Caucasus. What's the U.S.'s role in bringing this to pass?
Well, that is an important part of it. We've got to make that work. Another step is entering into an agreement on preventing double taxation, so that will encourage American investment in Armenia. We have got to say no to advanced aircraft going to Turkey. We're here to talk about what Azerbaijan did to the people of Artsakh, but we know it couldn't have happened without Erdogan. There are so many things that we need to do to help bring justice to the Caucasus.
As you know, Armenian hostages are being held in Baku cells. What's your message to Baku and Aliyev?
You can't claim there's peace if you don't release the prisoners of war.
Do you believe peace is what Aliyev wants, though?
He wants a piece of Armenia, and then he wants another piece of Armenia. I don't know if that translates well into the Armenian language, but the word peace has two meanings in English. You're not dealing with goodwill from Aliyev. You're not dealing with justice. He does understand power. And whether it is the transfer of American weapons to Armenia or the implication that we're willing to do that, Aliyev has got to see a constellation of economic and military forces that say that he'd better not try to take any piece of Armenia. Now, what exactly are the terms of the peace treaty? How does that relate to transit routes or trade relationships with either Azerbaijan or Turkey? Obviously, Armenia is not a rich country, and anything that can be done that takes peace and turns it into prosperity would be a good idea. But you need the peace first.
We've seen a recent attack on American investment along Armenia-Azerbaijan border with the purpose of impairing the investment image of Armenia. Will the United States ensure the safety of American investments in Armenia?
I'm frankly not familiar with these attacks on the border area, nor am I. I've talked to a number of Americans who have invested in Armenia, but none of the people I've talked to have invested close to the border. They've invested mostly in Yerevan.
Would the U.S. ensure the safety of American investments? The case I referred to was about a metallurgical factory along the border that they had to bring back inside the country.
I'm not familiar with it, but I do know that we have a president who is not exactly accommodating to those who destroy American property.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My hope is that the Trump administration will be strong supporters of Armenia and Armenian rights. But I think we're going to have to keep the pressure on in order to make sure that Armenia is protected. Obviously, Russia and all of those oil interests are also in that region, and we just have to make sure that the Trump administration stands up against all of that money and protects the human rights of the Armenian people.
Recently, both Baku and Yerevan announced that the peace agreement negotiations were finalized, but then Baku stepped back again and set up even more preconditions, false accusations of ceasefire violations. What's the US's role, in your opinion, to have peace in South Caucasus?
The United States has to be a peace broker. It has to ensure that Azerbaijan doesn't continue to add more and more conditions, even as the Armenian negotiators come to the table in good faith to reach a deal that does finally bring peace and the release of the political prisoners and all the other interests that Armenia has at stake. So I think it's absolutely imperative for the United States to play a diplomatic role to finally get a peace agreement that works for both countries.
Even though the concessions are adding up on the Armenian side, the Armenian Prime Minister said he's ready to put his signature under the peace agreement. However, even this is not enough for Aliyev. Do you believe that just peace is the peace that holds long in the long term?
I believe the only peace which is going to hold is one in which the Armenian people believe that all of their interests are being protected and that they're guaranteed. And that is something that I believe the United States can help to extract from the Azerbaijan government. Well, I'm writing to Secretary of State Marco Rubio to insist that he play a larger role in helping to bring a peaceful resolution of this conflict.
Armenian hostages are being held in Baku cells. What's your call to Aliyev?
Well, any agreement between the Azerbaijani and Armenian people first has to have a release of those political prisoners in order to ensure that there are good faith steps that are being taken to have a final peaceful resolution of the conflict.
Despite calls and statements which Baku has no ear for, if Baku does obtain, through the use of force or otherwise, a corridor through Armenia under Russian supervision, the region will fall under total Russian influence, and the West will lose all strings in the region through a forming ally, a democratic foothold in South Caucasus, Armenia. Mr. Rubin, thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Recently, both Baku and Yerevan announced that they were ready to finalize peace agreement talks, so to speak. But then, soon afterwards, Baku stepped back again, set up even more preconditions, and false accusations of ceasefire violations that Yuma soon refuted. What's your take on the possibility of peace in South Caucasus?
Honestly, I'm pessimistic. Having looked at other peace processes, it's always dangerous if, for one side, the process is more important than the peace. When I look at Ilham Aliyev, I see someone who wants to gain the credit of being involved in the process, who wants the immunity from diplomatic consequence, because people will say, if we actually hold Aliyev and Azerbaijan accountable, it could disrupt the diplomacy. But is he willing to take the final step? I actually don't think he is, because ideologically, his antipathy towards Armenia is simply too great.
The previous US administration provided facilitation platform for Armenia and Azerbaijan, as well as went forward and had a strategic partnership signed. How far do you think is Trump administration willing to go to ensure peace actually happens in South Caucasus?
Well, my worry is that while the Trump administration is going to encourage the continuation of the peace process, I don't see that they are in any position politically or militarily to guarantee Armenia's security and safety and the integrity of any peace that's signed. What's really worried me about the initial reports of a peace agreement is the demand that Azerbaijan made that European observers be withdrawn. Peace occurs when there is actually accountability and when there are third parties who can guarantee that the peace is being carried out. A demand to withdraw observers, to me, that seems counterproductive and counter to the notion that Azerbaijan is serious about peace.
During 2021 aggression of Baku against Yerevan, we have seen that a call from state debt actually stopped it. Do you not believe that this time also it could be as easy as that to have a peace agreement in place?
Well, ultimately, I think it will be possible to restrain Azerbaijani actions so long as there is a consistent light shown on the region, so long as there is attention. Aliyev thrives in darkness. That's why he doesn't allow a free press. That's why he kicks out or declares persona non grata any diplomats whom he doesn't like. The fact of the matter is, however, that Armenia being a landlocked country, being a country that's blockaded, there's actually a limit to what can occur. I also think that it would be a horrendous mistake to dismantle the mechanism of the Minsk process and the Minsk framework, because it allows the Russians, the French, the Americans, and others to work together. If you replace that framework, then ultimately what you're doing is replacing any mechanism that we can use in order to ensure both sides maintain their side of the peace bargain. Quite honestly, I don't think anyone's worried about Armenia maintaining its side, but everyone worries about the warning signs that they're seeing in Azerbaijan.
However, solid help, international pressure, call it transactions, is necessary or are necessary to have actually peace in place. So once again, how far do you think is the US administration willing to go to ensure this takes place?
I don't think the United States is willing to ensure. This is my concern. The United States is very willing, both under President Biden and now under President Trump, to encourage the Armenians to stick their neck out. But I don't see any willingness to guarantee intervention should Azerbaijan then strike at the Armenian neck. We don't want a repeat of Yuri Kim, in which he said under no circumstances would we tolerate military action, only to have a shrug of the shoulders 5 days later. The fact of the matter is, Armenia needs guarantees now. They need to end their isolation. If I may, the Treaty of Kars and the Treaty of Moscow, more than a century old, guarantee the Turkish-Armenian border and guarantee that it will be opened. And this was reiterated with regard to the Almaty Declaration upon the fall of the Soviet Union. The best confidence builder that we could now have is to implement past treaties before we actually demand that Armenia give further concessions for new treaties.
Domestic opposition also criticizes the government for, so to speak, excessive concessions. But the situation is very tricky. If you do not agree to what Baku requires, what you do is you give them false pretexts for aggression. Does this not look like a dead end to you? Do you see an exit?
I think when I look at some of those internal debates within Armenia, the debate isn't so much about what concessions are given. The debate is about when those concessions are given, upon what timeline, and with what verification. So, for example, I think there could be some very real debate about whether it's worthwhile to give a concession to withdraw European observers. how would that be a pretext for Azerbaijan to say bad faith when they're the ones who are demanding the withdrawal of the observers? Again, I ask, what does Azerbaijan have to hide?
Armenia and Turkey relations. You know that a process that both sides call a possibility, a window of reconciliation is underway, but we do not see much progress. What's your take on this? Do you see reconciliation as a possibility?
Look, ultimately, I think the region can only be at peace when Turkey is at peace with not only its neighbors, but also with itself. The danger is when there's 2.2 million people marching in Istanbul, that Recep Tayyip Erdogan, in order to distract the Turkish public, is going to start waving the nationalist flag, is going to start stoking ethnic hatred in the way that only he can. And so that ultimately is a danger. Again, what I worry about is not whether or not Armenia is ready for peace. I think Armenia is. I worry about the cynicism and the ideology of the neighbors. I believe, ultimately, that Armenia needs to make a demand to both Turkey and Azerbaijan to undo the ethnic hatred which is regularly perpetrated in their media. When it comes to Azerbaijan, this also means ending the kangaroo court and the trials of the hostages which they have taken. And the fact of the matter is, for Azerbaijan, this is quickly becoming a lodestone as people look through and recognize the nonsense. The problem is, Ilham Aliyev doesn't at this point in time care about the outside world, like Erdogan, who wants to distract his public. Ilham Aliyev is using the hostages and the sham trials as a way to distract the Azerbaijani public against the corruption and the declining standard of living inside Azerbaijan. The point here is that we need to recognize that peace takes sincerity on both sides. No one doubts the sincerity of Armenia. The debate between Nikol Pashinyan and some of his opposition is a debate over tactics. It's not a debate over peace. However, there's lots to debate with regard to the insincerity of Turks and Azeris in this.
What's the role of the international community in bringing peace to pass in South Caucasus? Substantial peace, I have in mind.
Well, ultimately, the international community can't impose peace. There's got to be an active decision taken for that peace. If I look at, for example, the Camp David Accords between Egypt and Israel, Anwar Sadat, of course, won the Nobel Peace Prize for agreeing to fly to Jerusalem and say enough war. A lot of people forget that he tried to achieve his aims through war first, failed, and then made the turn to peace. So ultimately, I think what the international community has to do is coerce and, to be blunt, punish Azerbaijan to such a point that it can no longer pursue a militaristic policy, that it has no choice but to accept peace. Only when Ilham Aliyev recognizes that the gains of military unilateralism are not going to be better, are going to set Azerbaijan back, only then will, as a matter of necessity, he be willing to even consider peace.
US-Armenia strategic partnership is viewed as a significant investment in peace. Do you see it moving forward?
I do see it moving forward. But again, the issue is with the Trump administration, quite frankly, Trump doesn't believe that American forces should be have boots on the ground elsewhere in the world. He's deeply shaped by what happened in Afghanistan, what happened in Iraq, and simply put, it's not just Trump. The political mood in Washington would not support that sort of military investment. That said, Armenia has other options. It has France. It has India. Both of these are important. While the United States isn't going to put boots on the ground besides regular training and so forth, we could have a serious discussion about military capabilities that we can provide the Armenians with. Those discussions have been underway. That's important. Now, Azerbaijan's lobby in the United States and elsewhere will say, hey, how can you do this? This will endanger our military technology. After all, Armenia works with Russia as well. That's true, for very historic reasons. But then again, India has a policy where they work with Russia, they work with the United States, they don't put all their military eggs in one basket. And yet India has never had an instance in which military technology has leaked from one to the other. I've asked the French about this, same problem, and they say it's easy. We provide the Armenians with what they need, but we also provide trainers and those who can supervise where those weapons end up. So the way moving forward would be for the United States to provide weaponry, but at the same time for the United States to boost its perhaps civilian presence, to make sure that that weaponry is being used for and by whom it was intended to be used for and by whom.
Are you saying that certain components aside, the rest of the strategic partnership is cancelled?
No. The strategic partnership is moving forward. And what's very, very positive, and again, I'll draw an analogy to India, where there truly is bipartisan buy-in for this. My only cautionary note is that while in Washington, policymakers want to have that piece of paper, they want to have that award from the State Department that they have achieved peace, but they can go home at the end of the day. The Armenians are the ones who actually have to live with peace. So it's not enough simply to have a signature on a piece of paper, to quote Neville Chamberlain. The fact of the matter is there has to be some guarantee. Every Armenian, official, opposition, civilian, military, must ask, are the concessions we're being asked to give, are they guarantees of peace? Or is there a chance that we can make all these concessions, Azerbaijan will pocket the concessions and then move forward with war? Now, when I was in Armenia on one of my recent trips, I saw fantastic plans about corridors, about interoperability, about regional integration.
The crossroad of peace.
Exactly. But my concern here is what's to stop Armenia from investing all this money for this plan, only to have Azerbaijan then say, thank you for investing all this money, we're still going to move into Sihanouk. That's my concern, and this is why, as Ronald Reagan once said about Mikhail Gorbachev, trust but verify. I don't see enough verification, especially with observers being asked to leave, and frankly, there's not enough trust.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you.
How does the international community perceive the situation in South Caucasus? The bigger the players, the bigger their concerns. US-China commercial war, the conflict in Ukraine. The list of concerns for the US is long. Still, a push here and a call there could help bring about long-awaited solution for a smaller scale but chronic conflict.
Mr. Evans, thank you for this opportunity.
My pleasure.
Both Yerevan and Baku recently announced that peace agreement talks have been finalized, but sometime later Baku stepped back, set up more preconditions, set up false accusations of ceasefire violations, and so the peace process is basically facing danger. What do you believe will the US administration do to help broker peace?
Well, I have to say, of course, that I'm not representing the current administration. I'm, in fact, in my retirement years. I think it's up to the parties themselves, primarily, to bring this to a proper conclusion. Now, it's not completely abnormal for peace process to start and stop and various things to happen. That does happen. We see the negotiations, for example, in Palestine, which have been on and off and so on. So this is not unusual, but I think it's important for Armenia in particular to keep her eye on the big goal of securing the Armenian state with everything that goes with a proper security situation, prosperity, and safety for the people. And I, as I've mentioned before, I do think that small states need not give up hope, because there are many things that well-organized and intelligent small states can do with their diplomacy.
Biden administration signed a strategic partnership with Armenia right on the eve of Trump's inauguration.
Yes.
This could be a very good political deterrent for a future, to prevent a future aggression from happening. Do you believe that Trump administration will assume legacy?
I've seen no indication from the new administration that they would backtrack on that particular agreement, which was fashioned by professionals. It should have no domestic political importance, and I see no reason that it would be taken back or overthrown. I do think, though, to emphasize my point, I think it primarily rests on Armenia and Azerbaijan to get to the right place on this peace treaty.
The Prime Minister of Armenia announced twice within the last week that he's ready to put his signature under the peace agreement, but Baku did step back. And so what's the role of the international community to help broker peace?
Well, I do think it's important that the international community pay attention to the situation. The European Union, of course, has its
eyes on the ground,
people there on the ground, and others, even though it's not so much in the press, other experts, diplomats and so on, are keeping an eye on it. And that's important, yes, to keep everybody honest. I am not saying that these problems are not real. They are difficulties. And I think a signature means something. And it's important to obtain the necessary ingredients before going forward completely.
What does it take a small state to succeed and to achieve peace in the hazardous geopolitical situation that Armenia is?
Well, it's always difficult for small states surrounded by powerful neighbors. I think the key to it is to work with all of the neighbors to reach an outcome which is optimal for the state. And I've been reading some of the articles by Vartan Astghik recently in which he has talked about this, the need for dealing with all the neighbors and even some more distant powers, but keeping an eye on the strategic goals.
Economic investment is another important security component, if I may. Do you believe that the U.S. will ensure the safety of their economic investments once they are there?
Well, I don't know the precise figures right now, but I know that American investment has quite considerably increased since the time I was there 20 years ago. And this is an important factor. We see the discussions with Ukraine over that very issue. And I do think the United States values the investments there. They understand that Armenia is particularly proficient in things having to do with. So I do think this is on balance a positive. And also the growth figures for the Armenian economy are quite impressive.
As you know, dozens of Armenian prisoners of war are in Baku cells. How does this align with American values? And if it doesn't, by general perception, a call from Washington should set them free. Why isn't that call being made?
Washington today is in rather a transitional phase. There are a lot of things on people's plates. I do think that you're right, that a certain push from Washington, either through, for example, Mr. Erdogan, or directly to Baku, could be helpful in this situation, and I would very much hope that that will happen.
Thank you.
My pleasure.